I cannot see the Honorable Senator from Marsabit County, the Honorable Mohammed Chute. Is then Senator holding brief for Senator Mohammed Chute? Yes, but we need to be persuaded that you have full instructions from the Honorable Senator by producing written.
Honorable Speaker, he said that he's almost arriving, so if he doesn't come, then make him help him.
Well,
I've
the
called him.
Prime Cabinet Secretary is already in the House. We cannot keep the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Now, honorable members, you know this session starts at exactly 9:30. Now, if you remember my communication yesterday, uh, I indicated that any honorable senator who has business listed in the order paper must be present to prosecute the business. And if you're not present, then that business will be dropped. It is extremely embarrassing to have the Prime Cabinet Secretary seated ready to respond to questions. And Honorable Senator for Lamu, we are not in Sambarazan, deep in Lamu. We are in the Senate plenary. It is extremely embarrassing that the Prime Cabinet Secretary made himself available in respect to this request to attend sent to him by the Senate, came to plenary in good time, and we're here being told that the Honorable Senator is on his way coming. We don't know how long it's going to take. That cannot be tolerated. I'm afraid I will have to drop this business. Prime Cabinet Secretary, we are extremely sorry to have you here, and the holder of that particular business is not around to ask that question. I will therefore release you. You may leave at your pleasure, Prime Cabinet Secretary. That business is dropped. Can you usher in the CS in charge of cooperatives? Honorable Senator Chute. Honorable Senator Chute, may you approach the chair, please? Now, Senator Chute just walked in while we were in the process of dropping his business. Clerk, can you confirm that the Prime Cabinet Secretary is still in the House or has he already left? Clerk, can you confirm? Can you confirm that we still have the Prime Cabinet Secretary in the House? All right. Senator Mohammed Chute, you may proceed. First, explain your absence when this matter was called out. If the chair is not satisfied with the reasons you're going to advance, we will still drop your business. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. My apologies to the Senate, to the Cabinet Secretary, and to you, Honorable Speaker. I was in a traffic jam. I came running all the way. And
Honorable Chute, you do not have a car.
I do have a car,
So why were you running?
but no, working here from my office, of course. My apologies again.
You may now proceed to ask your question.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I have a question for this Cabinet Secretary. Let me, Prime Cabinet, my apologies again. Thank you very much for coming. And you know, we respect you a lot. My question is, A, could the Cabinet Secretary state the number of Kenyan refugees in a place called Magado and Dilo towns in Ethiopia, and provide information on the timeline and circumstances of their displacement, as well as current state of their well-being? B, what is the government doing to facilitate the repatriation of the Kenyan refugees? And could the Cabinet Secretary provide a timeline for the same? C, could the Cabinet Secretary outline measures put in place to ensure successful reintegration of repatriated refugees into the local community? And finally, D, will the government compensate the refugees? And if so, could the Cabinet Secretary state whether the compensation will be paid? Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may now proceed to respond, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to respond as follows. And I would seek the indulgence because it's a fairly elaborate response, so that hopefully I can satisfy the concerns of the member. Part A, that is on the information on the number of Kenyan refugees in Megado and Dilo towns. Let me respond as follows. The Kenya Borana refugees arrived in Ethiopia in 2005-2006 and settled in the Borena zone of the Oromo region in Dilo and Megado settlements. Their displacement was triggered by a series of inter-ethnic conflicts in Marsabit County, particularly the conflict between Borana and the Gabra ethnic groups over natural resources, grazing lands, contested and disrupted territorial boundaries, and of course, local political dynamics. Most of the refugees originate from Marsabit County in the following sub-counties: Saku in Marsabit area, North Hor, Maikona, Dukana, North Hor, and North Hor again, and Muyale sub-county. Upon arrival in Ethiopia, support and protection was initially provided by the Borana clan of Oromo region in 2007. They were registered by the Administration of Refugees and Refugee Affairs, ARA, of Ethiopia and UNHCR. They have continued to live alongside the host community, and ARA is currently known as the Refugees and Returnees Services of Ethiopia. On the number and population statistics, according to the Department of Refugee Services, over 500 families of Kenyan origin living in the Dilo and Megado areas of southern Ethiopia ran away to seek asylum due to inter-ethnic conflicts in North Hor in the year 2000. The conflicts culminated into what came to be known as the Turbi massacre. The breakdown today, as at 3rd as at 3rd of December, it's a statistic, but I'll hand over this also to Parliament. For the Dilo, we have a total of 2,060 in Dilo area, and in Megado, 3,600. In terms of households, these now comprise 1,250 households, 5,671 individuals. Male are 2,788, female are 2,883, and children are 3,385 out of the total figure of 5,671. What are the solutions we are looking at? From 27th October to 3rd December, the RSSS and the UNHCR conducted a verification of the Borana refugees in Dilo and Megado refugees settlements. During this period, an intentional survey was carried out to assess the refugees who are willing to return to their home country, Kenya. In terms of households, this amounted to 1,098. In terms of individuals, this was 4,993. Notably, 88% of the total refugee population expressed their intention immediately to return to Kenya. The refugees expressed interest to return to the following areas. 1, Sololo, 1,836, Marsabit, 1,081, Moyale, 633, Oran, 491, Dukana, 325, Moyale Township, 272, North Hor, 206, Maikona, 59, Sangate, Jaldesa, 40, Turbi, 13, and in other areas, 37. Mr. Speaker, the majority of the refugees were not willing to return to their area of origin due to fear of ethnic conflict. They also prefer to move to areas that are inhabited largely by the Borana community. The Kenyan refugees in Ethiopia still retained their identity cards and are now willing to return home to Kenya voluntarily. The second part of the question is about facilitation on the repatriation of the Kenyan refugees, and I wish to respond as follows, Mr. Speaker. The following are possible options. 1, there's organized and facilitated return by the UNHCR. This requires a formal engagement between the governments of Kenya and Ethiopia and is formalized through a tripartite agreement that will include the UNHCR. It will require a rigorous process that entails internal survey to go and see visits, identification of settlement areas, signing of voluntary repatriation forms, and other bureaucratic processes. This option may not be immediate as it requires time in order to fulfill all the requirements. There's also the self-organized or self-return, which is usually spontaneous, and the role of the UNHCR in this option will be limited to provision for information and funding to facilitate the return of the refugees. This option requires the government of Kenya to facilitate receiving and resettlement of repatriated individuals. Third, due to the proximity of the refugees to the Ethiopia-Kenya border, their families in Kenya, including the possibility that they cross over to Kenya to visit their families, UNHCR prefers the self-organized return. For repatriation to take place, the refugees must desire to return, and the Kenya-Ethiopia government should engage in consultations facilitated by the UNHCR Regional Bureau and local UNHCR offices. Currently, as I said, 4,993 individuals have expressed their desire to return back to Kenya, and the process of repatriation should begin. The third aspect was the measures put in place to ensure successful reintegration of the repatriated refugees into the local community. Mr. Speaker, again, this has quite a number of issues which I'll try and run through. They may not be exhaustive, but it's important. There are a number of concerns which need to be addressed that have been expressed and should be addressed before repatriation can take place. These include the following. One, where will the displaced persons return to? How will they be accommodated? That is land, housing, among others. The refugees have been relying on humanitarian assistance to access basic services, and they will need similar support until they are fully integrated. We will have to deal with the issue about their safety and security in the settlement areas. There has to be a proper formal reception organized. We also have to cater for their material safely of the younger generation who are born in Ethiopia. The refugees will require assurance of legal safety, rehabilitation, creation of livelihood opportunities, and in some instances, repossession of property, including ancestral land. We will also have to address intermarriage, births in Ethiopia, and confirmation of documentation for spouses and children. There's also need for mutual recognition of the documentation of issues to the refugees because we are dealing with the other country as well. Finally, the question of whether the government will compensate the refugees. With regards to compensation, Mr. Speaker, the government only facilitates return and reintegration into the Kenyan society for any Kenyan refugee granted asylum by any country. No compensations are paid by the government for any returning Kenyan. What do we consider as the way forward? One, repatriation of refugees should be undertaken for those who are willing to return, as it must be voluntary, based on an informed choice and consent to return given by the refugees to avoid coercion and prosecution. It should also be done with dignity. And we hope this process can commence as soon as possible. Kenya should also ensure returnees are safe, devoid of discrimination, provided with basic services and access to essential services to avoid being exposed to another cycle of displacement. We must also engage and coordinate with the UNHCR, Kenya government, and Ethiopia government to facilitate the return of the refugees, including on the required legal formalities, particularly documentation. The send-off from Ethiopia and the reception in Kenya should be done simultaneously. We also have to identification of settlement areas for the returning refugees in coordination with local authorities so as to guarantee safety and security in the resettlement areas. The government will also be looking at how to ensure access to basic foods and services such as health, education, non-food items, shelter, and livelihood opportunities. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I wish to reiterate that the ministry remains seized of the situation in the region. A lot has been done, however, much more remains to be done. The ministry appreciates the continued support of the Senate and further requests that the Senate advocates for more resources to be put at our disposal for comprehensive data acquisition and integration to ensure that we remain seized and fully prepared for the changing dynamics globally. Mr. Speaker, I submit.
Honorable Senator Mohammed Chute, you may now proceed to ask your two supplementary questions.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I really wonder. The Prime Cabinet Secretary is giving us stories. This is a literature the Prime Cabinet is giving us, and it is very unfortunate. What I want to know from the Prime Cabinet, my question number 2 is very clear. The question is, how are you going to ensure the refugees will be returned back to Kenya? They've been there for many, many years. The answers you've given from A to I is a story on what you are going to do. You have not given us timeline. You should have told the people of Marsabit and the people of this country that on this day, we are going to visit Ethiopia. On this day, we are going to sit with the government. On this day, we are going to bring these people back to Kenya. On this day, we are going to facilitate them on this and this. But the stories, and really, I really don't understand. The same question I am asking you, you are asking me again the same question, that this is A to I. Please tell us the timeline. Are they going to stay for another 10 years, or they are going to be back in the next 1 year? Question number 2. Honorable Speaker, these people have been in Ethiopia for quite a long time. I want the Cabinet Secretary to tell us, when is the last time people from your office visited those guys in Ethiopia? The last time, if there is even any. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may now proceed to respond to those 2 supplementary questions.
Mr. Speaker, I just wish to, I explained myself that I'll make a fairly broad statement because the issue of the refugees is a very complex matter. And I want to say that consultations and negotiations are going on. And appreciating that when you're dealing with refugees, it has to be voluntary. There can be no forced repatriation. So these discussions are going on between the government of Kenya and the government of Ethiopia and the UNHCR. And this is the reality of the matter. Mr. Speaker, for whatever it is worth, I just want to point out that we would not want Kenyans to be refugees anywhere. And if we had all the resources and all the planning, it would not necessarily take this long for the refugees to be to be repatriated. But remember, you have to do it voluntarily, because any forced repatriation will be contrary to the international law and matters of humanitarian rights. So we cannot force. We have to be, and that is why there's an elaborate process, which I've put in my statement, about preparing documentation and ensuring that the individuals, the households, voluntarily accede to repatriation. The second one is that our Department of Refugees is in touch and is seized with this matter, Mr. Speaker. So I can only say that we will continue working systematically to be able to do that. The final thing is that in Kenya, as an example, we have a similar situation in a place like Dadaab, and we have a similar situation in Kakuma. Handling challenges also as a spillover from other countries. And therefore, it is a big challenge on matters refugees. So I just want to request the honorable member and the House to appreciate that this is a process and we have to do it so that we are not in breach of any laws, and to also make sure that the requisite resources are available to facilitate the smooth movement of the Kenyans who are out in Ethiopia.
Now, Prime Cabinet Secretary, if I go to the Honorable Senator for Marsabit correctly, you have indicated in your response that there are 4,903 refugees who are willing to return back. So these ones are not coerced. Already they've expressed their willingness to return home. Is there any program that has been put in place, including timelines when the 4,903 will return home? So that we will deal with the others later, but for the 499,3, is there a program, including timelines when they will be brought back home?
Mr. Speaker, the 4,900 that I've given and disclosed, we have reached this after a very elaborate process that is ongoing of making sure that we are systematic in this process. That's how we've arrived at this figure. So in terms of timelines, Mr. Speaker, that is something that I can seek the intelligence of the House to get further clarification from the Department of Refugees if they can be more specific on the timelines. But I can still maintain that there'll be largely indicative timelines. They may not be those that are firmly cast in stone. They could be indicative.
Thank you, Senator Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask.
Before you ask your question, Senator Newton, Prime Cabinet Secretary, I'm going to allow about 10 or so senators to ask the supplementary questions. So just note down the questions as they are being asked, then you respond them at a go. Proceed. Proceed, Senator Newton, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to raise an issue with the Cabinet Secretary about very recent media reports that we are integrating refugees from other countries into Kenya through Shirika Plan. And there has been a lot of problems with the host communities. So, Mr. Speaker, my question then to the to the Prime Cabinet Secretary is exactly what is his ministry doing to see to it that the resettlement and the integration of the refugees in Kenya then has the blessings of the host community, and that the government does not just wait for UNHCR to do all the planning. Exactly what is the participation of the government in this particular matter, and what has been done in order to have the host community agree or be looped into this particular arrangement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Manzo.
Mr. Speaker, recently there was a riot by the refugees in Kakuma camp, and within a week, a chartered KQ flight flew quite a number of them to Germany. About 3 weeks ago, could the Cabinet Secretary clarify whether this information is true and whether the international law was followed to release these refugees to Germany while they wanted to be taken to their own countries? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And I want to thank the CS for his timely coming before even the Senator. Honorable Speaker, my question is, one is that there are refugees who are willing to return back. And they've been there for the last 20 years. And they're willing. But the Honorable Prime Secretary has not said the timelines. I don't know why the government is not prepared for that. One other thing is, there's a plan to integrate the refugees to the local communities, which is already in process. And already you are seeing somewhere in Kakuma, the locals are just demonstrating. That shows that there was no preparedness by the government. Because these people, most of them may not be able to integrate. One, they live from different regions, they come from different clans, they come from different religions and all these things. Two, there are not enough facilities to accommodate all these refugees. In the like place like Dadaab and this place, there are over 600,000 refugees. If these same people will be integrated within the locals, the infrastructure which is available is not enough. So how prepared is the government? And what is the input from UHR? Thanks so much.
Senator Kavindu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mine is just to ask Honorable CS, how is the government plans to settle the Kenyan refugees who are here in Kenya already? Because there are some refugees who are living in Kenya and they are Kenyans and they are refugees, and others called squatters. Squatters are in many places in Kenya, and these people have nowhere to go. Like there are squatters in Machakos who are being called squatters in Katelembu, and they are being told to move out. How are these people going to be settled and be kept in Kenya and to be settled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavindu, the Prime Cabinet Secretary is in charge of foreign affairs. That's a domestic issue that falls in a different ministry. Anyway, if the Prime Cabinet Secretary would wish to give his thoughts on that matter, he's welcome, but really it doesn't fall within his docket. Senator Cheriot, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate the opportunity and the chance. I have a question for the Prime Cabinet Secretary, and this is in regard to the State Department on that's under him on BLAs that Kenya has signed in the last 2 years. Is the Prime Cabinet Secretary in a position to tell this House how many bilateral labor agreements Kenya has signed in the last 2 years, and how many are in the process, and why there is seemingly a delay in conclusion of some of them that have been under negotiation for quite a while? Because I know these agreements will open up opportunities for many young Kenyans that are looking forward to apply their trade elsewhere where those opportunities exist. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Majority Leader, you know better that a supplementary question must relate to the primary question. The question you've just asked does not meet the requirements of a supplementary question. However, Prime Cabinet Secretary, if in a position to respond, you may. If not, you don't have to, because that is not a supplementary question. Senator Lomenan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to ask the Cabinet Secretary regarding the refugees in Kakuma and Dadaab. There is a report by the government to differentiate assistance given to the refugees, assistance called differentiated assistance. I wonder what is the difference between the assistance given to the refugees and assistance given to the host community. B of that question, Mr. Speaker, is the Cabinet Secretary aware of community, the host community have been difficult, I've seen a difficulty in integrating with the refugees. And is the Cabinet Secretary aware also that enough time has not been given to the host community to participate, to be informed on how they can integrate with the refugees? Because the nature in which the government or the NCR UN have been dealing with the host communities was unfair. And because of this injustice, it has forced the host communities to refuse to integrate with the refugees. because of the hostilities of the refugees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Boni.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to tell the Cabinet Prime Minister good morning. And Cabinet Secretary, these refugees ended up in Ethiopia because of the fight that was taking place between the Borana, Rendile, and the Gabra. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, our colleagues, Honorable Abdi Sasura, Honorable Dr. Bonaya Kodana, Honorable Kuraja, Dr. Kuraja Kalkalo, and former Assistant Minister, MP for Nakuru, Honorable Miruki Kariuki, lost their life when they were going to address this thing as these people ran out of the country. So it is something that evokes bad feelings in the leadership of this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, fail to understand that over 4,000 Kenyans have requested that they go back home. Because the challenge, you said yourself, that the refugees must be willing. They have even indicated to you the areas they want to go to, and they have told you that we want to go to areas inhabited by the Borana community, where they think there is peace. Mr. Speaker, my question then begs, the UNHCR is ready and willing to fund the return. The refugees have indicated where they want to go. Where is the problem? Why is the government dragging its feet? And Mr. Speaker, it is very suspicious because the Cabinet Secretary knows that the government made an announcement that they are opening up the borders to allow Somalians from Somali to come into Mandera. So if you are looking for people outside Kenya to come into Kenya, why don't you make it easy for Kenyans outside Kenya to come back home? Finally, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I know you're about to shoot me. I just wanted to say, if you have the figures, please give us the kind of support you have given compensation to the families of these honorable members, 6 of them who died. I forgot to mention the Titus Ngoyoni. They were our colleagues in this house, and I was with them.
Senator Faki.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika, yangu ni kumpongeza Prime Cabinet Secretary na pia serikali kwa kuwezesha kuachiliwa huru kwa Steve kule Saudi Arabia. Wiki iliyokwisha kulikuwa na habari kwamba Steve ambaye alikuwako amehukumiwa kifo na serikali ya Saudi Arabia alipata mfadhili kupitia kwa shirika la Kiislamu, wakamlipia ile ridhaa ya milioni 124. Na ningependa kuipongeza serikali kwa kushughulikia mambo yake na vile vile pia kusimama na familia ya Steve na hakika atakaporudi nchini Kenya, nafikiri itakuwa ni fursa nzuri kupewa makaribisho, kwa sababu alikuwa ni mtu ambaye amedhulumiwa katika kesi yake, na vile vile pia alikuwa amehukumiwa kifo kwa makosa ambayo alikuwa sio makosa yake, kwa sababu hakuua kwa kukusudia, lakini aliua kwa kujitetea, kwa sababu mtu alikuwa amempiga na yeye alipojitetea yule mtu akaumia, baadaye akafariki. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, la kufurahisha ni kwa alipokuwa gerezani kule Saudi Arabia.
Senator Faki, what is your question, please?
Naja kwa swali langu Mheshimiwa Spika.
Go straight there.
Yeah, swali langu ni kuna wengi kama Steve ambao wako Saudi Arabia ambao wameshindwa kurudi nyumbani. Wengine wana watoto, wale watoto kwa vile Saudi Arabia hairuhusu zinaa, wale watoto ambao wamepatikana Mheshimiwa Spika hawana uraia, kwa sababu wako kule, wa Kenya hawajui hapa, na vile vile pia hapa hawajapata vyeti vya kuzaliwa wala vyeti vya usafiri. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, nataka kujua ni jambo gani ambalo waziri anafanya ili kuhakikisha kwamba wale wa Kenya ambao wana watoto kule, wana familia kule, wanaweza kupewa vyeti vya kusafiri na vile vile pia vyeti vyao vya kuwawezesha kurudi nchini kwa salama. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika.
Senator Faki, that does not meet the threshold of a supplementary question. However, we are discussing refugee issues here in a context of the Marsabit Ethiopia situation. That does not certainly meet the requirements of a supplementary question. However, Prime Cabinet Secretary, if you're in a position, you may proceed to shed light on that matter. If you're not obliged to do so today. Senator Veronica.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Prime Cabinet Secretary, the bedrock of protection of refugees is based on the principle of international responsibility. We have seen the Shirika policy program that has been undertaken by the government and specifically your ministry. I want you to confirm to this House whether that Shirika plan is being funded nationally or internationally, and whether there has now been an exchange of humanitarian assistance that should ideally be going to the biggest camps in the world, Kakuma and Dadaab. Whether we have exchanged that with the grants for development, as a result of which Kenya will be forced to pay for that Shirika plan, as opposed to the international community taking up humanitarian assistance for refugees, whom Kenya has been kind enough to host for a very long time in the largest camps in Kakuma and Dadaab. And whether those Kenyans who came from Marsabit and who are now in Ethiopia are going to benefit from the Shirika plan to come back to the country.
Senator Beatrice Kenya.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. My question to the Cabinet Secretary is, what is the state of basic services that the Kenya refugees in Magatho and Dilo towns in Ethiopia have access to? And now that you are planning for their coming back to Kenya, what are the reintegration plans that we have as per our national standards, particularly on the education and health and other basic amenities?
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to my neighbor. Mr. Speaker, mine is straightforward. Under Shirika plan, how many Kenyans have refugee status across Ethiopia and across other nationalities? And Mr. Speaker, under Shirika plan, how much resources does the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs needs to bring back Kenyans who are willing and others? It should give us the estimate so that we don't just use a sweeping statement that we need only to lobby for more resources. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mgatana.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the floor. Mr. Speaker, on 12th of July 2005, the Turbi massacre took place, and this is the basis upon which these refugees ran away to Ethiopia. Mr. Speaker, it was a very sad moment for this country. 56 people are reported to have died. This country has a responsibility for the safety and the life of every Kenyan. What I want to hear from the minister is, have you compensated the 56 people who were killed because of the clash between the Gabra and the Borana? And what programs have you put since then to at least put back the people to where they were. Mr. Speaker, there has been a very serious, how do I call it, ignoring and disregard of the northern lands in this country. And even the lives of the people who live there, they don't count. Mr. Speaker, if that had happened here in Nairobi, or it had happened here in these counties around, there would have been a different reaction. But Mr. Speaker, now we are talking almost 20 years later, no program, no compensation. Can the minister tell us exactly what programs the government is putting in to help our Kenyans, and how much money has been set aside to compensate these families? I submit, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may now proceed to respond to those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'll just talk to the issue of Shirika plan. And I want to state that there's still a lot of conversation that is taking place between the government, the UNHCR, and the host communities where the refugees are placed. And specifically, if I talk to Kakuma and Dadaab, Mr. Speaker, Kenyans perhaps may need to be reminded in certain circles, not here, but out there, that we have had refugees who have stayed in these camps for as many as 35 to 36 years. Some have been born there. Some have no idea of where their parents migrated from and whether they know where they would be going if they went back. In both camps, this is a challenge that we still face. The second aspect is that the honorable members, I think it should be on record that even as we speak, the situation in South Sudan is getting worse. And we are beginning to see again another inflow at the rate of about 20 refugees per day. So we are beginning to see certain circumstances that are giving us challenges. We also still remain with challenges of the Al-Shabaab and the conflict around the Somali side. And we also have sporadic conflicts along the Marsabit, Ethiopia border from time to time. So there's a serious security issue that has to be looked at regionally, but also internally by Kenya's security forces. The issue of the Shirika plan, when we say we are talking and it was launched formally, we are engaging so that as the process of looking at the policy moves on, we can also maximize what is going to be the benefit to the people of Kenya. Because we do not want, as somebody said in the differentiated, somebody mentioned the differentiated assistance. It is true that there was a means testing within some of these camps, and they would look at the status in terms of well-being or economic being of some of these refugees, and therefore that would determine the level of rations that certain families would get as opposed to others. Now, these are issues that, if not managed well, can also create a lot of tension in the refugee camps. And this may be part of the reason that there could have been some challenges recently in Kakuma, amongst others. So I just want to state that we do not want, as a government, to enter into any program that is fully funded by the government. We can only handle our position in the context of international obligations. And if the refugees are going to be here, then the institutions like the UNHCR, WFP, and others who support this program will also be talked to and urged to be more productive so that Kenya's resources are not fully deployed for that. Secondly, we do not want to have a situation where communities reach a stage where they feel that those who are refugees are living a better life than the Kenyans themselves. So these are very delicate conversations that keep going on between us, UNHCR, and the host communities where the refugees are. And it would be wrong if I made all this statement without really appreciating the generosity and the humanitarian nature of the communities that have hosted these refugee camps for as long as I have said, 35, 36 years. It is not an easy undertaking. It brings a lot of pressure on the resources in those areas. The other thing, when we talk of integration of the refugees, it has to be done carefully because we also want to transit from a situation where refugees are just drawing from Kenyan resources. They must also be put to a situation where they contribute to growing the wealth of this country and not just taking from the people of Kenya. So the whole Shirika plan is premised on these basic principles and a few others. The other thing that I would want to touch on is that the Honorable Boni Khalwale raised issues about the insecurity, protracted insecurity in these regions, and also recounting the loss of many honorable Kenyans because of this conflict. And also Mungatana has raised the issue of compensation. I want to be very candid on something here, not to belittle the challenges we are facing, but the truth of the matter is that we are still having insecurity in certain regions, either because of pasture, because of ethnicity, because of the scramble for resources in those areas. We've given an example of Marsabit. You will also recall that even not too long ago, Kenya lost General Ogola in the Baringo side. Again, on a mission dealing with aspects of conflicts internally. So we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we can change cultural practices. We can provide meaningful alternatives for people to earn a proper living that does not cause the loss of lives. And I would want to point out that, for instance, in Marsabit, and going into Marsabit, the government is doing quite a bit to try and open up the areas. The road network that we all know, that is really moving, and it's going to eventually go beyond and link up to Garissa. And the road network, the investment that is going in that place, jointly by the government of Kenya and the World Bank, is massive. And all this is to help in facilitating so that there are more economic opportunities. So it is not that the government of Kenya is going to neglect or wishes to neglect anybody. It's a question of just us having more resources and deploying them progressively into these areas. I wish to state that Honorable Mthama, I agree with the speaker that that is a completely different angle, because internally displaced Kenyans for other reasons are tackled separately not in the context of the refugee program. So that would have to be taken up as a completely separate question. When we talk of resources, I hope I've also addressed partly the issues raised by Beatrice, Senator Beatrice, in terms of the state. No, she was talking of the state of basic resources in Ethiopia, not here. In Ethiopia, I cannot say that they are very elaborate, because the situation of refugees is that even the government, the host government that is there, can only do so much within the context of their budgetary resources. So we cannot vouch fully for what the government of Ethiopia can do or not do within the refugee camps. However, what is critical is for us to accelerate the relocation of the Kenyan refugees from Ethiopia. And the message I'm taking from here is that resources need to be set aside urgently to be able to undertake this challenge. There are issues that will require further scrutiny about compensation of victims. I don't want to make generalized statements. We'll take that and we can respond to some specifics with better detail and more accurate information. Mr. Speaker, some of the questions were interconnected. On the issue of bilateral labor agreements, I just want to say that it's work in progress, but we are ready to file a report with Parliament as to how many bilateral agreements have been entered into and which ones are under negotiations. That we can do so that the information is availed to the Senate. Mr. Speaker, let me go away with the issue that we can respond with more clarity on the issue of timelines after further consultations, so that we are able to get a little more accurate information from the State Department that deals with refugees. The issue of Munyako and the plight of other Kenyans in Saudi Arabia, we are happy that as things stand, there's light at the end of the tunnel for Steve Munyako. The legal processes in Saudi are still ongoing, so that the justice system there can do all the procedural steps before he's finally given an opportunity to come to Kenya. And I just want to say that the World Muslim League is the one that made the contribution. And our embassy is closely in touch to try and assist so that this process is concluded. And indeed, there are many other Kenyans who are facing challenges, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in other parts of the world as well. And we are also in negotiations on the issue of children born in Saudi out of wedlock. And it has become a challenge because, as you said, It's taken very seriously there. So the embassy, the Kenyan embassy is trying to engage, and also the government is trying to engage to see if a formula can be found to allow those who are confirmed to be of Kenyan descent to be able to be given the necessary accreditation for them to enjoy their citizenship as we go forward. But it is a challenge that we face. I think I saw Honorable Manzo raised something about planes, Kenya Airways picking people and taking them to Germany. I just want to say that there can be no forced repatriation. There can be no forced repatriation or movement of refugees. If somebody anywhere has been allowed to board a plane and to fly to another place, it's because their papers are valid. Otherwise, they would not be able to leave and go to another country. So there's no forceful ejection and migration of any Kenyans or even refugees that has been taken by the Kenya government. So I think there is some misinformation somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary. I think that terminates our interaction with the Prime Cabinet Secretary. We will now move to question number 007 and 042. Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may now leave at your pleasure.